Hey everybody, welcome to the Shrimp City Report. My name's Devin. I'm joined by our co-host,
DJ.
Mr. Jonathan.
And we also have a special guest today, Pete Neighbour.
Hi, folks.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great. So your last name, Neighbour, it has a U in it, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say you are from England.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I usually tell people I'm from Alabama, but, you know. But, yeah, I am. I am indeed from London, England, yeah.
Right on, Pete. Okay, so one of the reasons we have Pete on today is because we'll jump to some details on the Jazz Festival that's coming up in Charleston. He's going to be kicking it off tomorrow. But let's go ahead and start. I guess the guys and I were talking before the show, wondering how and when you got into jazz and the instrument that you chose. What is your primary?
My primary instrument is clarinet. I double saxophone, but clarinet's my primary instrument now. Yeah,
right.
Has been for a long time.
Is this something that your parents pushed you towards, or did you gravitate to it?
No, I always say the clarinet chose me rather than I chose it. My parents, bless them, were actually tone deaf, so there's no musicianship in my immediate past family. My grandmother was actually musical on my mother's side, but both of my parents were not musical. But I think I inherited something from my grandmother. It kind of skipped a generation, which over years of including some teaching that I've done, I have found that to be reasonably common, that actually often musical talent, for want of a better word, does skip a generation. So anyway, I went through a few instruments, piano, violin, and, you know, like kids do, and really was just the same as thousands and thousands, probably millions of other kids that would have their lesson at school and would go home and the instrument would either go under the sofa or the piano keyboard would stay shut or whatever until the next lesson, until an incredibly good, kind and very talented music teacher, who I was so fortunate to have, suggested that I try a clarinet. And I really did not have much idea of even what a clarinet was. You know, I had no desire to play a clarinet, so that's why I say it kind of chose me. But I just took to it like the proverbial duck to water, you know. And within a few months, I'd really fallen in love with the instrument, you know.
It's funny you say that, because I always feel that clarinet has a bad rep, especially in America, because in elementary school you got a bunch of like 7-year-olds trying to play it's like sophisticated like instrument like that. Everyone assumes like the clarinet sounds like a goose scratch.
Well, it can do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it still does, even when I play it.
Come on, you're a pro.
No, I think you're right. Well, it's also a somewhat unfashionable instrument. Without getting too heavy into the sort of history of jazz and everything, you know, the clarinet was an extremely big instrument in terms of popularity back in the sort of 30s, 40s, with people like Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Woody Herman, and you know, they're the big three, but there were many, many others. And then, of course, the saxophone was starting to appear more and more and more, and then people like Charlie Parker come along, you know, in the 40s, and then the clarinet was just eclipsed, and I'm not just saying this as a clarinet player, but the clarinet is actually a harder instrument than the saxophone.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But the problem is the saxophone has got that kind of sexy image.
It's an axe, you know. It's
that's used in advertising has used it so much. You know, you drape it over pretty girls, or you drape it over
Careless Whisper,
whatever,
you know.
Yeah, you know. Whereas the clarinet's rather unfashionable.
Right. The saxophone really, you hold it in tight. It does look like almost an amorous experience just, you know, watching that. So, I mean, I can understand that. The clarinet, though, you're right, you know, from the 40s and the Benny Goodman stuff, you know, read up a little on that. And so when was did the 50s, you said Charlie Parker and all that, so the 50s kind of bottomed it out?
The 50s was also stylistically different, not
Okay.
just the instrument, because of bebop sort of became the big movement in
Okay.
jazz. Late 40s, early 50s. You know, it was kind of around in the 40s, but really the 50s was when it exploded, as it were, onto the scene.
Okay.
And the clarinet, maybe because it's a difficult, you know, a somewhat difficult instrument, didn't lend itself to bebop that easily. Now, there were some incredible players that succeeded in playing bebop on it, but unfortunately they've been mostly forgotten by the public and history, not by musicians. I mean, Buddy DeFranco, who is not exactly a household name, but he's was a monster clarinet player who successfully played bebop on the clarinet.
So you have very much a layman in myself who knows
Sure.
very, very little. So what would be a good example of bebop as opposed to what you were playing earlier?
Well, someone. Charlie Parker would be the archetypal. Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
They're the kind of two big names that leap out, and they're also easy to find. You know, on YouTube, on any web search. You know, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker. That would be a perfect example for a beginner to just listen to some
Right.
bebop.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to pause right now because I'm going to unplug that.
Yeah, sorry, I keep getting all that buzz on the...
It's driving me bats. I can't come up with a good question.
Ironically, I think I might be the one person who can't hear me.
Okay.
So
Is all that wasted, or are we just gonna?
no.
No, we're
It's-
good.
It's
So
just
what it was it was catching
Okay.
it. The headphone amp only is what we
It's
were
not
hearing.
my phone, is it?
No,
Yeah.
no,
Oh no! It's the cheap old amp that we still use.
Oh,
So, Devin, you got anything you want to queue up and pick this up with?
Let's see.
All right, I'll go ahead and get it swinging
No,
back
I
in
got
here.
it,
All right.
I got it. So, all this musical influence. At what point were you like, "Hey, I'm in my heyday. I'm going to move to South Carolina, much less the United States." You know.
Well, that my move to South Carolina was not actually particularly music orientated. I met my wife, who was originally from Orangeburg, South Carolina. So when we met in Europe, she was living in Columbia, South Carolina, which is where I first ended up living over here, and which is a bit of a culture shock after living in London. I have to say. But as I always say to people, although it was a culture shock, I was at that point spending maybe 6, 7, even sometimes 8 months on the road a year. So I was coming back to Colombia for I was not away for big chunks. I was only ever away for a week at a time, 10 days at a time. So backwards and forwards.
Right.
And actually, I quite enjoyed the fact of living in what to me was a small town, and I don't say that with any insulting. Coming from
for sure.
London, Colombia is small. So I quite like the novelty of being able to go to a restaurant that we knew was 7 minutes drive away, rather than in London where you think, well, I better allow an hour to get there, and then you got to park and.
So
Right.
did you guys meet through music?
Well, I was working and she wasn't.
Yeah.
She was actually on vacation, but
Nice.
we met. So.
So did you tour a lot around like the UK, like London, or any of the other areas?
Well, I certainly have. I mean, London was my home for most of my life. Before I've been here about 15, 16 years, but I grew up in London and spent most of my life living in and around London. So, what a lot of Americans don't always understand is that the proximity of a lot of European capitals to London. So it was actually very
right.
easy
Yeah.
for me, and indeed it happens all the time. It's very common to take gigs in Paris or Zurich or Rome or Berlin or Hamburg or Stockholm or whatever, which is what we did. So touring in Europe was relatively easy and relatively common.
Yeah, because I guess the price. So you have the channel, or even in the old days, you got over with barges and ferries
Oh yeah,
or whatever.
in the old days there was a hovercraft that
Oh, yeah.
I can remember taking.
Oh, wow.
And the ferry, yeah. And again, a little bit of useless information. It's pretty much, it's a little bit more, but the same distance to fly from New York to LA is New York to London. You know, it's people don't realise. And by the same token, I don't think a lot of Europeans realise the vastness of the USA.
Yeah.
When I lived in New York, we had a lot of European tourists, and it's like I live in New York City, and there's like, yeah, we're just gonna pop down and see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's that's like a 10-hour drive. What are you doing?
People going by and asking, how do I get to Texas?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, travel's prohibitive from here to Europe. I mean, that's all there is to it. So, and especially if Europe, I mean, is the scene was the scene then? Did they relate more to jazz and that type of music, or when you started, say 70s, 80s, whatever? There was a lot of musical revolution happening in England and Europe.
So are you asking whether like European audiences are different?
I mean,
to
were they
American
more?
audiences?
I don't want to say
Appreciative.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. It's very strange that there's something about an audience anywhere that seems, and it may just be a perception, but seems to appreciate someone from another country more. You know, you're just a little bit more, and I use the term, you know, in inverted commas, exotic, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I mean, I regularly go back to London to perform, and I seem to get a different reaction now because I live in America. Well, I'm still the same person that worked in London for God knows how many years, but I'm now treated differently. And I sometimes get it over here when I work out of South Carolina, you know, because I have a British accent. Or as I say, I don't have an accent, you do. But, but yeah, so it's a very strange phenomenon, actually, this audience appreciation of musicians. And you're right that there was a musical kind of revolution going on, but I will say that you could probably pick any decade and there'll be a musical, you know, because bebop in the 50s, you know, doing the swing era kind of dying out. Then the 60s, of course, was the Beatles. And of course you had Elvis and you had Bill Haley, and then you got kind of punk rock coming through, and there's always something, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that you held steadfast with that type of music. I guess it wasn't hard finding like-minded musicians. How do you go about that in South Carolina? I see on a couple of your records you actually recorded here, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. South Carolina has some phenomenally talented musicians. I mean, and I'm not just saying
Charleston
that.
Jazz is,
You know, the University of South Carolina in Columbia, as my wife calls it, the real USC.
Right.
Me and your wife are going to get into it.
Yeah. We're Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, has a really excellent jazz faculty, and I got to know a lot of the guys that work there, and in fact, one of the albums I made in South Carolina features a guy called Burt Ligon, who I'm working with tomorrow night at the Charleston Jazz Festival, and we recorded together. And he is a very respected jazz educationalist and performer.
So in that vein, I saw on your website, or I've seen online, that you and Skip Pearson would do a lot of collaborations together. And
dear old Skip, yeah.
Yeah, he was known as the South Carolina ambassador of jazz.
Absolutely.
Of course, Charleston has an incredible jazz history.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, as a South Carolina, or more like a Charleston jazz musician, that you do have this obligation to, to show this music that might not be as popular as it was, to, really bring it to like the kids and make it wider known? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm passionate, as fortunately many jazz musicians are, of introducing younger people to the music, because they really don't get a chance to hear the music, you know, unless it's I don't want to say forced upon them because that's not the right phrase, but unless they're introduced to it in some way.
It's almost like classical.
Yeah,
you have to have
exactly.
someone kind of bring you in. You're not going to hear it on the radio.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're the kid that sort of searches out something different on a radio. You know, there's a guy in Colombia called Mark Rapp, who you may have heard of.
Not sure.
And he runs Cola Jazz, which is Cola being, of course, short for Colombia.
Right.
But it really stretches for South Carolina. You know, he's based in Colombia, and he is passionate about music education and taking jazz into schools, primary schools, and middle schools, and whatever. And I've actually done some of those things with him, and it's incredible to watch the kids' reaction when they're just seeing. And we have to remember, a lot of these kids have never even seen any live music.
Yeah.
They might have seen it on the TV or, you know, on their iPad or whatever, but actually seeing live musicians playing an instrument.
It's funny you mentioned that. A lot of so I went to Charleston School of the Arts just down the road here.
Yeah.
We had like a band, like a lot of people that would specialize in like saxophone or whatever have you. And a lot of them ended up leaning towards not just like, you know, brass, but even like piano leaned towards jazz
Sure.
and stuff
Yep.
like that. They even had to do live performances, and a lot
Yeah.
of them ended
Yeah.
up.
I can well believe that. It's a music. It's a kind of double-edged sword in a way, because the very thing that I love about jazz is also the very thing that can make it a very difficult commercial thing to sell.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about it is that it's very hard. It's a very sort of, dare I say, democratic music.
Right.
It's a very open, it's a very loose kind of framework to that you build upon. And yet that very thing makes it hard to sell from a commercial standpoint, because if you say Pete Neighbour, a jazz musician, concert, you know.
Right.
Well, okay, well, what does jazz mean to you? It could mean banjos from, you know, banjos. It could mean a big band. It could mean Kenny G. It could mean New Orleans brass bass. It could mean bebop, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, that's a whole range of styles, and it's all jazz.
You've got a quartet tomorrow, right?
Yes, I have, yeah.
What do we have? Bass?
We have piano, bass, drums, and myself. Strictly speaking, I should say keyboard rather than piano. But,
Okay.
But you know, it's a piano sounding keyboard. The style of music is not like a Hammond B3 or
Jazz synth, you know.
Yeah. So,
Is it easier to manage with the four? I mean, you inspired by Benny Goodman, but how many people did he have? 34?
I know. Well, a traditional kind of big band is 16, but
Okay.
Benny also had a lot of small groups, trios, quartets, sextets, and it's not really a question of easier to manage, or I mean, it's financially easier.
Well, yeah, sure.
But it's really what you're comfortable with, and I've done some big band things as well, you know. And various size groups. I actually enjoy the format of a quartet. I did make an album with piano, bass, drums, vibraphone, and guitar.
Oh,
and
yeah. Yeah,
myself,
Jonathan noted the vibraphone.
which I love. But I actually, but again, I mean, one has to be kind of realistic financially. It's much more, you know, if I'm selling a product, going out to an agent or a venue, you know,
Right.
then if I say I want to take my 16-piece big band on the road, it's a little bit more complicated and expensive than taking maybe 3 or 4 guys on the road. You know. But I do genuinely love a quartet, piano, bass, and drum. You have a great rhythm section, and you can just, as we say, just sit on that rhythm section. It feels great, you know.
That reminds me of a quote of one of the guys from Pink Floyd, and I forget who it was, and it's going to annoy me, but he basically said a really good band is a drummer and a bass and then a couple side acts.
Yeah.
You know? So as long as, you know, like the drummer and the bass makes everything look good, and then you can just go wild on top of that, as long as that's, you know, tight and it's connected and it's, you know.
Yeah. Well, as a horn player, you just need a good rhythm section, which is either guitar or piano. In fact, actually, Bert Ligon, who's on that album and is working with me tomorrow, actually plays guitar and piano equally well.
It seems to swing. It seems to be a lot of freedom. It seems to be a lot of jams or improvising. When are you up there and you think, oh man, I better start reeling this in? Is it, it's not, I mean, I guess you're not playing 30-minute Grateful Dead songs, but.
Well, I guess to that point, what is songwriting like for jazz?
Yeah.
You would consider, I don't know, as a person outward looking in, I'd consider jazz to be at least 25% improv, to me at least.
Yeah, I would probably say more than 25% actually. Well, there's still unless you're going to start talking about completely free avant-garde jazz, which is hard to describe verbally, but you can just Google it.
Yeah, sure.
Which I'm not really interested in and don't perform. But the music that we play has a form. It has what we call a musical form, and you usually have a bar sequence. You have a 12-bar blues, which most people have heard of.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The Great American Songbook, which I pull a lot of material from.
You're talking to a former chorus kid.
Right.
The bane of my existence. Yes.
And Michael Bublé fans.
The Great American Songbook, George Gershwin, Rodgers and Hart,
sure.
Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, etc., etc. The form of the majority of those songs is probably 32 bars. So, and you have, and they're divided into 8-bar sequences, 8 bars, virtually repeated, a bridge passage, and then a final 8 bars. So 4 8s being 32. Now that's not everything, because sometimes will be, extensions on that.
Some leeway.
But so there is a discipline. You play the theme, you set the theme, the audience hears the theme, you then improvise on it, you go back to the theme. That's it in very basic terms.
Yeah.
Well, how much of that is instinct, and how much of that is cerebral? Because, I work with a guitarist who's very good, but he's trying to learn, get better at the theory.
Right.
So he's like, okay, you're playing this. Now it should sound right if I go up this and then add this seventh and da 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 da.
Is it math or emotion?
Is it math or is it just
it's a combination of both. I think a good musician is a combination of both. And I don't think it's very hard to say it's 60-40, 50-50, 70-30. It is a combination, and that combination can change within oneself. There are certain songs that I hate to admit it, I've probably been playing since I was 14 or 15.
Sure.
That I truly don't really have to think about the chord sequence when I play them. It's like it's just built in. I've played them so many times, and yet if someone throws a piece of music at me with which I'm unfamiliar, then I'm going to have to look at the chord sequence and possibly the melody, and
of course,
I'm going to have to use, to coin a phrase, more math than heart, as it were.
So the Music Farm tomorrow night, that's one of the best venues in town. Have you played there before?
Actually, I've not played there before. No, I'm looking forward to it.
They redid it. It's a really nice hall.
I'm looking forward to it very much. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to. Hopefully, we can go by. I'm looking forward to hearing some kind of music in there besides punk rock or heavy metal
or rave or
So who's behind the jazz festival here? Is there a consortium or some kind of organization?
Actually, Charleston Jazz is the organization that's behind it. Yeah.
Okay.
Charleston Jazz.
How long have they been kicking around?
They've been kicking around a while now. I'm going to have to get my facts right. I think they changed their name to Charleston Jazz. I'm sure many local folk will have heard of Charlton Singleton.
Mm-hmm.
Who,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
Who was the most
Devin
wonderful-
knows him.
Yeah, he actually used to teach at School of the Arts.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so I was there when he was still teaching the band.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, he's the most wonderful trumpet player, as you know,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and,
absolutely.
musician, singer as well. In fact, I saw him only last week with Ranky Tanky at the Gaillard, which was phenomenal, actually. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know they were there.
Yeah, they were.
Well, that's really cool about this weekend with the Jazz Fest. They're having events in the venue, the Charleston Music Hall.
They are indeed. In fact, the festival runs from the 18th to the 21st.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Charlton's performing at the Charleston Music Hall, I believe, on the where are we? At the he performs on the 21st.
Okay.
No, he's at the Firefire Distillery, which is actually not
Oh,
too far.
is
Oh,
that-
that is,
Yeah.
That's one of our favorite venues.
Yeah.
It is a great venue.
Perfect.
Yeah, but there's some great acts. There's Arturo O'Farrell, which is a Latin jazz guy, and he's phenomenal.
I'd like to see that. I like
Yeah.
bossa nova and samba and
the
that style of
Preservation Hall
music.
Jazz Band from New Orleans. which is
Absolutely, they're
phenomenal.
bringing it home on Sunday, aren't they?
They are indeed.
So-
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, Saturday. I think they're Saturday at
Okay.
Charleston Jazz Fest at the music hall. At the music hall.
I kind of have a question about this. Might be a dumb question, kind of apropos of nothing, but I have a question more broadly about jazz in general. So, like when jazz was first becoming popularized as like American music, it was dangerous and like people were drinking late at night at these clubs and it was seedy and smoking the jazz cigarettes and whatever. Well, it was the party music of the
Absolutely.
time, and it
Absolutely,
was like kind of like what people would again say about punk rock or
Sure.
hip hop later or house music. When and how do you think that transition happened to have it be rightfully like respected? Like because usually people talk about jazz, it's up there with like
It's like high
classical.
society type.
Yeah. It's like how and when do you think that happened?
Well, it's actually kind of hard. It's a very good question. It's kind of hard to answer because deep down it still is a dance music. So we love to have it put on a concert hall because it gets a measure of respect that maybe you don't get in a beer cellar
Yep.
or something,
Yep.
for want of a better phrase. But it's also nice to see people get up in a concert hall and dance in the aisles, So, I think jazz should always be a little bit on the edge. Even if you're playing a traditional style of jazz, there should always be an element of danger in what you're doing musically, because I think it makes it exciting.
Yeah, I think that comes back to because like, you grew up during the punk revolution in
Right.
England. So
Right,
do you
right.
think that maybe flavored that a little bit? Why you maybe went to jazz instead of maybe classical? Of
Yeah,
like
I was the original rebel. Yeah.
yeah, no, jazz was
That
kind of like
was,
the
yeah.
first counterculture.
No, I wish I could claim that, but actually, I really couldn't. I just love the music from
Oh, yeah.
when I first
Yeah,
heard
of course.
it. No, I think it's very hard to kind of put into words. We're almost back to this definition of the word jazz. When I described
yeah.
all
Sure.
the different styles, meaning so many things to different people. It is at heart a fun music. It should be something. From a personal point of view, I can't speak for every jazz musician, obviously, but I like to see my audience smile and enjoy it.
Sure.
And I, 99 times out of 100, I enjoy a gig. I enjoy performing. So I think jazz started. This is going to sound maybe a little controversial when a lot of people get turned off of jazz because they think it's too insular and too maybe up its own whatever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, to the max. Yeah.
When musicians and I'm not going to name names, maybe just sort of turn their back to the audience and just ignore the audience and just perform for each other. It doesn't matter what style you play, and I think we have an entertainer, which is at heart what a musician is.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, if you cut out all the sort of surrounding, we are entertaining. So I think we owe the people that are listening to us something, and we have to entertain them. How we do that is up to us, but I think ignoring them is not the answer.
No, that's a good point. I haven't thought about that, because I've seen that, just in the little bit of jazz that I've seen, and just people that I know as a musician. Sometimes when you jam and you really are, you get in the groove with the bassist and the drummer, or just bass and drums. I see that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess they're trying to stay into the thing. But
yeah, I mean, we all get kind of excited in our own little world at some points during a jazz performance, I think. Yeah.
So what you're saying is we need more jazz musicians to crowd surf.
Yeah.
Sort of jazz mosh pit. Oh, yes, sir.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some instruments, then DJ is probably going to talk to you about some culture style things. Yeah. But so in your quiver right now, do you have, so what kind of clarinet? I know there's like an alto clarinet. There's 5 or 6 different styles. Is there a piccolo clarinet or?
No, there are different styles. There's bass clarinet, alto clarinet, B flat clarinet, A clarinet, C clarinet, blah. But all of those are pretty. There's basically 2 clarinets every day, which is an A clarinet for the orchestra and a B flat clarinet.
B flat, okay, I read that.
Which is my instrument.
Okay.
Which is the standard clarinet that children would learn on.
Okay.
Most people play, and obviously bass clarinet in orchestras as well. But B flat clarinet is the go-to clarinet.
It seems like a warmer sound than.
Yeah, it would be very hard for the sort of lay listener to tell the difference between an A clarinet and a B flat, because there's only a half tone obviously between A and B flat.
Right.
But yeah, B flat clarinet is the go-to clarinet.
Okay, so I also was going to ask you, the oboe, is that a cousin?
I would say that was a second cousin.
Okay. Yeah, you don't see a lot of.
No,
oboe virtuosos, although in
it's
rock,
a great instrument.
Yeah, for sure.
Orchestral instrument. It's not really a jazz instrument. It's also a very different mouthpiece reed-wise.
Yeah. The dude in Roxy Music played one. So that's the only reason I remember that. So Deb, you want to? We're going to talk about a little bit of the Low Country culture and what you think about it. So
well, okay. First question I got to get out of the way. Moved from London to South Carolina. You basically left the mecca of beer behind.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And you come to South Carolina.
Culture as in beer is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The starter of civilization. Yes.
From Heineken, Carlsberg to PBR. So I got to ask, what was your experience of that switch?
Well, I'm not actually a serious beer drinker. I like a beer, and I go back to England regularly, and I enjoy a beer in a pub. But I actually, and I now be interested to see how many people switch off now. I actually drink my beer at room temperature. You see, I don't have it cold.
Yeah, because we actually met you at. We just happened to meet you at Codfather.
That's correct. Yeah.
And we noticed you drinking your beer at room temp. We were like, this guy must be really good beer.
Well, your bio says that you're a bit of a wine enthusiast. Is that more of
I do.
your style?
I do like wine. Yes.
Okay.
I'm more of a. I would drink wine over beer most times. Yeah. Or a gin and tonic. Being very British.
You're very British. Gin is making a super resurgence right now.
It is.
It's shocking. I know that I just watched something on the History Channel or something talking about when Smirnoff and vodka destroyed gin, and
That's
right around the time when Dr. No came out, the first James Bond movie, and Smirnoff sponsored them to use it.
Oh, I didn't know.
In their I didn't either. And I was like, well, that's very cool. Because anyway, what else you got, D?
Yeah, I mean, other than beer, just which we could probably talk 30 minutes about that, but I'll save the time. Just being in South Carolina, where you can literally cut the humidity with a knife, or just the topology. What did you think about moving to South Carolina?
Environment.
It was, all joking aside, it was a learning curve. I mean, it really was. I've been coming to the States. My first visit to America, the USA, was maybe mid 80s to late 80s, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I've been coming both for pleasure and to perform since that time. New York, Chicago, the West Coast. You know, I actually never visited the South. I had been to Florida, but I'd never been to the South before I met Vicky, my wife, and it really is like two different countries, the North and the South.
It is, for sure.
And
Well, even from Charleston to 30 minutes outside of Charleston. Yeah,
yeah,
it's-
absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, South Carolina is I've learned a rural state, and yet I live in downtown Charleston, and of course it doesn't feel like a rural state.
Oh, not at all. It's a gem. It is.
You know, so it's just in terms of language. I mean, I should tell the one funny story, and this is absolutely true. It sounds like it's a gag, but it's true. The very first time I met my then prospective wife's parents,
Right.
we went to their home in Orangeburg, and they were a very typical Southern couple, and Vicky's mother was at that point probably 80 years old or something, you know, white hair, sort of twin set and pearls,
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
proper,
yeah.
you know. And we were sitting across a dinner table, and you know, I'd been married before, and Vicky had been married before, but you still, when you meet your prospective in-laws, you want to kind of make a good impression.
Yeah.
So we sit across a table, and Catherine, Vicky's mother, leans across to me trying to make conversation. She says, "So you're a musician, Pete?" "Yes, that's right. You know, do you sing?" I said, "No, I'm afraid I don't. I really don't." Are you an actor? No. Do you dance?" No. So I'm saying no to all these things, and she
Right.
says, she kind of looks and she says, "What, you don't shag with Vicky?" So I kind of just,
Yeah.
so I actually thought I'd misheard. I
Right.
didn't react because I thought
Right.
this lady cannot be saying what I think she's saying.
She is so progressive.
So I said, "I'm sorry, Catherine. What did you say?" Well, it was like a 30-minute sitcom where the hole was just dug deeper and deeper because she
Oh,
said,
yeah.
"Well, if you,"
we used it all
she
the
said,
time, man.
I'll teach you how to shag," says my prospective mother-in-law. She says, Bill, being her Vicky's father, my father-in-law, said, "Bill took me shagging on our very first date."
Yeah. That's hilarious.
And I was starting at that point. I knew I hadn't
Yeah.
misheard, and I was starting to slide under the table. And my then girlfriend Vicky was kind of looking at me because I was embarrassing her, but she didn't realise what the word meant to a Brit,
Oh
Right.
my goodness.
and that's absolutely true. True story.
man.
They had to draw the line when they started talking about shag night at church.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Well, because you said it was 88. I bet the 90s with the fanny pack must have been very difficult for you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, shit. That's a
yeah.
funny thing. So I also heard this other thing recently. So, you know, the American dictionary or the dictionary. So right after the Revolutionary War, I don't know if this is a urban legend or whatnot, when they put out the New American Dictionary, that's where some of the words that we have that are different, that missing E's or no U's or something like that, like valor became,
Right.
you know, valor. So I heard that was done just basically to troll England, like, you know, like an FU.
Well,
to,
it succeeded.
Released on April 1st, that year.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's particularly with my surname, you know, which of course.
Oh,
is
yeah,
Neighbour.
absolutely.
I've kind of given up. I'm really not offended by it. Seriously, I'm not. But I did have to be careful in things like booking airline tickets, you know, because if you get a name wrong, then they can. Some certain airlines can be quite picky. But
Well, yeah.
but you know, restaurant reservations and whatever, it's never spelt right. But you know.
Oh
it is
yeah,
what it
for sure. And frankly, when I was a kid, I would call it drought beer, you know, because I was saying it phonetically. So Deb, you want to we're going to follow up with our last question and then plug upcoming events and whatnot. So, Dev, you want to
so
send us around the table?
A general last question for every podcast, but I'll change it up a little bit. Normally, we will ask, what's your favorite way to eat shrimp? In your example, what's your favorite way to eat a prawn?
Oh, very good. You've been doing your homework. Actually, curried.
Really?
Wow,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's some
I
fusion
know.
right there, because you don't think like Indian and
well,
seafood
I-
mostly.
I
Sounds great.
love spicy food. So I know I probably should say fried down here, but
No, that sounds.
I'm afraid
phenomenal.
curry
I'm
drink.
jealous because I've always wanted to eat English Indian because I've heard it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's really not that many great places in the South to get into.
That it's
No.
people
You gotta
often
hunt
ask
for
me
it, yeah.
what I miss about England, and actually these days it's with technology I can speak to people easily and
Yeah.
everything. And grocery stores have English foods pretty much. There's really not much that I can't get except a good Indian restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a decent one over in Mount Pleasant. But anyway, I digress.
There's a new Pakistani restaurant opened on Meeting Street, actually.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
Very good. Mum
Okay.
Saab. I'll give it a plug. Mum Saab.
Okay, cool. And we have it recorded, so I'll know where to go. Jonathan, how you been enjoying your shrimp lately? None, because we're all poor. No. No, it's Charleston. We can get it for $3 a pound.
You know what? You didn't say fried. I'm gonna say fried. Yeah.
Okay. You have any shrimp stories for this week?
I like mine with what's it? Again, we're doing fried again, but coconut shrimp.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I heard the sad news yesterday that Red Lobster might go into bankruptcy.
It's a dark day.
Well, I mean, so they went into all-you-can-eat shrimp nights, and then they started doing it more often, and people just crucified them with
So
it. Just
you're-
ate so much.
You're basically saying they need to stockpile on Cheddar Bay biscuits.
Yeah, because they're going out. I'm staying on my shrimp toast kick, even though there's really not a lot of great Chinese that I know about locally. I still love shrimp toast. So let's talk about the upcoming events. Of course, the Jazz Fest. What time you playing tomorrow?
6 o'clock at the Music Farm tomorrow, which is the 18th. I'm kicking off the festival, but there's two other bands on actually after me. Who are
okay, great.
fantastic. There's the Southern Pines and the Mike Quinn and the Parade Band.
Mike Quinn, local, I believe.
Yeah,
Like kind of heavy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's gonna be cool.
should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. So this podcast will be coming out on April 18th in the wee hours, but we'll still have it on social media. Do you have some social media you want to promote? Your website?
Yeah, actually, I need to get my website up to date, but you can find me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram if anyone's interested in keeping up with my travels and my work.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And it's
Pete-
all my name, Pete Neighbour.
Okay.
But remember the U at the end.
you.
Neighbour.
Yeah, so you can also you can catch him on that. You can catch him on Spotify. There's one record. There's other music platforms that you can just bounce off from his website and social media. Boys, do y'all have any saved rounds? Okay.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, we've interviewed a couple people, and yeah, of course, we try to do like a little bit of homework beforehand. So far, you are the only person who has the product, the line of instruments that he has in the bio, and we can cut this if it's just like, oh no, it's a sponsorship, they paid me money, so I shouted them out, or if it's like if there's actually like something different that they do that other clarinet companies don't.
It's genuine. I
Yeah.
play Selma.
Okay.
Selma
Clarinets,
yeah.
Selma saxophone
Consonant,
and
yeah.
Selma clarinet. And I've played Selma for many, many, many years. I can't think, but 40
Right.
more years than I care to remember. And when I came to, excuse me, when I came to South Carolina, I did actually meet someone from Selma. When I was living in Columbia, and I was just happened to be playing in town in Colombia, and someone came down from Selma, and they agreed that I could be a sponsor, asked me to be
Right on. Okay,
Selma
cool.
artist. So yeah, so that's why it's on there.
Okay.
And I do genuinely play, and I genuinely love Selma instruments.
All right, props to
that's great.
Selma.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks for stopping by. We'll be back next week. Of course, this will be out tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see y'all at the Music Farm or some other event this weekend. Ciao.
Adios.